Thank you for joining me today, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So I'm stumbling over my words as always. So I have to ask you. My podcast is called Naughty Bites. What's your guilty pleasure?
Wow, it's funny because a lot of I mean, it's quite a good question for chefs because we all do have a few. For me, I quite like well, I really like processed cheese strings. It's a bit bizarre. I remember so when I was traveling in Mexico, I remember I traveled through America when I was like 25, 26, and then I went down through Central America. And in America, when I was traveling around sort of Texas and stuff, we'd just be driving a lot, and cheese strings were like quite an easy thing to just have and dip in like different hot sauces. So you'd be in like Texas and New Mexico and all the different hot sauces. I was like testing them, but using the cheese string as a kind of like a bit of bread sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then I got down to Oaxaca, and Oaxaca has a special cheese which is like this crazy, like beautiful mozzarella, like kind of salty cheese string that's bound up in this big ball. And it was like, still to this day, I think it's some of my favorite cheese. And I just remember went to a hostel there in Oaxaca, and my partner at the time, she'd gone off to see some ruins. I stayed behind, and I ate like a kilo of it in one night. And when they came back the next day, they said to the lady in one of the girls in the hostel who just turned up, said, "Oh, how's the hostel sort of thing?" And the lady said, "Yeah, it's all right, but there's an English bloke who I think ate like a kilo of cheese last night." And my girlfriend at the time said, "Oh yeah, I know who that is. I know exactly who that is." So that I like cheese strings, and also cheese strings, hot sauce, and then for dessert, fab lollies, which are like the little like rocket, like kind of knob, like they're 3-layered like British lollies. They're delicious. And I ate 32 of them once after service when I was really hot.
This is like a Weetabix challenge. Like, who can eat all the Weetabix in that one packet? It was like what, 24.
Yeah, but it's a 36, so that's 4 boxes. Yeah, 4 boxes of 6. It was it was quite good. My kids enjoyed like playing with the sticks afterwards though.
Oh, fantastic. You could have made a bird cage. So I was going to ask, like, everyone always talks about their food memory with their grandparents. Your father is Rick Stein, but did your grandparents have any inspiration, provided with any inspiration to cook?
Yeah, so on my mum's side, my grandparents, they're Yorkshire, from Yorkshire. So there's a lot of I remember Yorkshire puddings. I mean, to this day, to be honest, I can't really make a Yorkshire pudding. Even I probably could, but I seem to do it. I seem to just never get it right, and people just make them, and people always give me recipes, and I can never get them. But I think I can never get them good as my gran would make them. And my dad's mum, she was a great cook, and we used to spend Christmas with her, and she would do like some really, so because our family has German heritage, so it would be a lot of kind of things like braised cabbages, hams, like all kind of Christmassy stuff, but definitely like didn't necessarily sit there and learn a lot from them, but like would definitely have really strong memories of eating it. And I think the most important thing from both sides of the family was just sitting down and eating together, like as opposed to like grabbing a bite to eat and sort of sitting in front of the TV and stuff like that. And that's kind of something that I take into with my own kids as well. We just sit down and eat together. It's really important.
No, definitely. I can agree to that, And so you mentioned before that you've traveled a lot. And so, doing the research on your book, World on a Plate, what new food trends and experience influenced your exploration of the world of food? And, when it comes to planning your next adventure, do you follow your belly or do you follow your nose?
Definitely follow my belly. Yeah, I think I've been lucky enough to be traveling with food since I can remember. Mum and dad would be looking for inspiration for the restaurants when we were very young. So spent a lot of time in France in the early 80s when we were really small. And then as we got a bit older and were able to travel more long distance, we'd spend time in Asia and India, and quite a lot of time in India. And still, I don't think you could really do Indian food justice if you lived there for 5 lifetimes. It's such an amazing food culture. But and then a lot of kind of South Asia, Australia, and sort of that was our sort of, we do that every winter because the restaurant would close in the winter for 4 or 5 months, because unlike now where Cornwall's an all year round tourist destination, we would be closed because there just wouldn't be anyone here, you know. So, and it was good. So it's sort of ingrained into me to use food as a tool to travel with. And I think it's a really nice way of seeing a country, because everyone eats. And I found myself in places like, you know, the Solomon Islands out near Papua New Guinea, with no real way of communicating with people, but going fishing for tuna and showing them how we make, you know, how we'd make certain dishes with tuna in the UK. Obviously, they'd be mostly Japanese-based dishes, but, you know, like tuna sashimi or tuna guacamole with lemongrass and that. And you know, you can sort of, if you can cook, it's one of those skills. I think you can find yourself in places that your average tourist doesn't necessarily get to, because I think you'll naturally eat street food, which gets you talking to people that are locals, that are, you know, like the local tuk-tuk drivers or the local taxi drivers, or these kind of people that really can open doors in tourism. And the worst thing is sometimes taxi drivers can just take you to tourist traps, but when they know that you understand food, they want to show off. Things like, you know, if you go to Southeast Asia and stuff, and you ask, you know, taxi drivers will often be a really good source of, you know, if you ask where they're from. I think the best way to find out about food is to find out where somebody's from, you know. So even if you're an Uber in London, you say, oh, where are you from? And somebody will say, you know, I don't, Eritrea, Somalia, something like that. And then you start asking them about the dishes that remind them of home. And then they'll start saying, oh, there's a place in London where you can get like a similar thing to what we'd eat at home, the curried goat, whatever it might be. And you find these like little things even in your own town. So I think it's a really nice way of traveling. So I always use food as a kind of, you know, even if I'm going back to the same places, I'll always try and find something new.
So I think it's like food in general is like a universal language. Even if you don't have the speaking language, you can communicate tremendously and widely through cooking.
Yeah.
And everyone loves to eat. Well, I hope everyone loves to eat, but you know, I think it's a good way of exploring culture.
Yeah, food and haircuts. I think if you can cut hair and you can cook, you can pretty much go anywhere in the world and be like, you find yourself like a, you know, sort of, you know, they're both good transferable skills that go across cultures. You know, that's what I think.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, I've done that in Thailand. Like, I had a mess of hair from the humidity, and I had to get it cut because it looked like a ball of string. It just literally went horrendous. Got it cut, but it went too short, so I looked like a boy in my teenage years for like a couple of months. It was really bad. It was really bad, but yeah, it does connect you to the culture. So whether you're cooking at the restaurant or on television, I've seen that you focused a little bit on, you know, local Southwest foods with a bit of an Asian twist. What makes Europe and Asia so appealing to you?
I think it's more that I guess it's you know, one of the things I always sort of used as a kind of reason for writing the book, and also what I do a lot in food. And wasn't my idea. This is something that's happened in London for the last sort of 15 years, from like the whole pop-up scene of like, you know, the early 2000s, and that was like kind of when I was really engaged in kind of food as a you know, like trying different things and cooking with lots of different people in weird spaces all around London. It was like people were just saying, you know what, Britain's kind of food culture has been kind of reborn by people like my old man and, you know, Jamie Oliver and all these people, and like it's really great that we've got all these great dishes, and that, but actually what they've managed to do is create a market for really good quality produce, like, you know, fruit, veg, meat, fish, which was in danger of dying out in the 90s, because it was just people weren't buying from farmers markets, and butchers, and fish counters were closing, and this, that, and the other, and you didn't have all these kind of small farmers and, you know, all this sort of stuff that's now tied to restaurants. And I think what we all discovered at the same time, you know, people like Neil Rankin, Gizzy Erskine, James Lowe from Lyle, all these people were obsessed with, a lot of them had trained in Copenhagen and been shown like how you can use the product of a country to really like make really amazing food. And I think what we'd all sort of realized is that there's amazing produce in Cornwall, you know, where I'm from. So everyone would phone me up and say, we're coming to Cornwall next week. So I got to meet all these chefs that I maybe wouldn't have met otherwise, and then got to do loads of pop-ups with them in London, and sort of taking produce up there with a few other people like fishermen and farmers from down here, and just enjoying the kind of the limelight of Cornwall as being, you know, this kind of what it's become is this amazing you know, food center for produce and for chefs. And then I started to think, well, Pit Q was a restaurant. If you ever went in Newburgh Street, it was like American barbecue food done by Tom Allen, who's now at Coombs Head Farm in Cornwall. And he was the first person to show me how you could just take amazing Cornish pigs, whatever pigs were being grown down there at the Warrens butchers, and then turn them into like American barbecue food, which, and having traveled around America, I love American barbecue. It's so interesting, so varied. But it was using this, like when you go to America and you have American barbecue, often it's grain-fed beef, and it's all kind of, you kind of question where the provenance of some of the meat, but because it's all massive, it's sort of supersized. And when it was being done with this Cornish kind of small breed, little tiny Dexter cows and red ruby cows or Mangalitsa pigs and all this kind of stuff, you realize that it's actually what you really should do is, well, what you can do is take inspiration from places you visited that you really like, whether it's Asia or America or wherever, but then use the raw ingredients from where you're from, so the meat, the dairy and things like that. And where you can't get hold of green papaya because you have to fly it in, basically you use Granny Smith's apples. And then where you've got then you've got like chicken, you're making a chicken or pork dish, but you're using these great produce that we've got here. So that was kind of the inspiration. So it's sort of basically just saying you don't necessarily have to make British food with British ingredients. You can make food that's inspired by the world, but just make sure you're buying everything from your local farmer's market or butcher, or do you see what I mean? Right. And in some ways, some of the been to Asia a lot of times, and some of the chicken dishes you get there are some of the nicest chicken dishes in the world, but the chickens themselves they're like jungle chickens. They're really scrawny and they're kind of tough, and then if you get a nice kind of like free range chicken and you make like Soto Ayam or something like from Bali, or Lab or something from northern Thailand, you just start to like see it opens up just slightly different worlds. And now there's lots of restaurants in all the cities that do this, places like Somsar and and Hoppers and all this kind of stuff. They're using Cornish produce but just doing international stuff with it. So it's kind of a movement, I suppose, of just like fusion in the 90s was kind of a bit of a bad word, but actually now I think it's kind of matured and become like a kind of more of a sensible way to look at using great British products.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think as well now the word fusion, or the term fusion, is also a good way of introducing other cuisines that you wouldn't necessarily get to enjoy, such as Peruvian Japanese. So a lot of people don't understand Peruvian food, but the fusion of Japanese food with it makes it more appealing and a slow introduction into people enjoying other.
And I think in the early days of fusion, it was more like just people just going, let's get like two things and just put them together. And it was more of an experimentation. I think it was used as a pejorative as well. People would just take the mickey out of it because it was kind of didn't really know what it was doing. But I think as it's matured and people have realised that it's more of a fusion between the ingredients of where you live and the techniques or the things that you've seen. And in all my cooking, if I'm making a Sunday roast at home, like the Sunday roast gravy will have stuff from all over the world in it. It's always got some sort of like Asian kind of umami flavor, fish sauce or soy sauce, or might have even a Vegemite or Marmite. It might have fermented black vinegar from China, the red vinegar from China for acidity, or all these different things. And this is all just like been to eat my roast dinner, you'd do like it's the most quintessentially British thing you've ever seen, but it just tastes delicious. But it's because it's got these like things in the background that no one knows about that are all from all the travels around the world. So I think it's kind of, it's just like I say, a maturation of the word fusion, and just the fact that but then I think you do then slightly get into a bit of trouble when you start to pretend that you're being authentic. And I think there's been this kind of debate about cultural appropriation, I think, which you've got to be mindful of, because I would never pretend to make a Southeast Asian food like the way in any traditional way, and that's why I'm very very specific about saying that this is inspiration. It's not like I'm not pretending to know how to make the best lard in the world. I just know that I love lard, and I like it with free range pork from Cornwall, and I've got all the lard prick spices from the north of Thailand, and I'll just use what I've got around me.
Then when we think about our relationship with food, going to Asia, visiting family, it was a whole thing of you know, you respect food, you have food together, and you sat around a table or on the floor. How do you, you know, and also as well, everything was from the local village. You know, the fish was down a minute down the road, or, you know, you go to the local butcher. However, the butcher, like you said, we had scrawny chicken curry, and as a kid, I was not a fan of it. I'd rather have fish or vegetables. Hopefully, it's changed, but you know, how do you find people's relationship has changed in terms of food culture in the UK?
I think so. I think we're in danger of losing our food culture at one point in the sort of 80s. You know, everything was French, and it was basically seen that we couldn't really have a food culture. And then we've slightly reinvented our food culture, and so that puts us in a weird situation. So a country like, say, Thailand or Italy have such a long culture of food, and like a continuity from great grandparents to grandparents to parents to children that then goes on and gets passed down. Whereas for us, we sort of had almost a break, and like, you know, you might have heard, you know, like I said, I can think of a couple of dishes my gran made, but it was never like we were watching her cook and she was teaching us the dishes like you'd get with nonnas and parents. And you know, my wife's Sicilian, and like the way that they pass down their information is much more kind of orchestrated and organized. But so I think the British food culture has become a bit of a magpie culture because it sort of could reinvent itself a little bit. So what you're seeing is lots of people are really interested in food, but food doesn't serve this kind of, I suppose, utilitarian purpose that it does in longer food cultures. You know, you look at my wife's nonna and the way that she produces food, it's a long process, because that's how it's like you fill your day with making things. And you know, it's a different culture than that we've got now, which is much more kind of like instant food, in the internet and all that sharing of information. So we've become the Brits are really into food. We sell lots of cookbooks. It's you know, it's well known. We sell more cookbooks. It's a bit like how the Brits have got the most convertible cars in Europe, you know, and it's typical of the Brits. We buy more cookbooks than everyone, but whether or not we actually cook as much as other cultures do, I'm not sure. But I do think that we're fascinated by watching food TV, and also equipment and ingredients, and have everything right. But I still think that we've probably got a way to go to have like what you would say is a food culture that we're going to be passing on for generations and generations again, like we obviously used to, but we lost it a bit. So we're in a bit of a juncture, I'd say, a bit of a kind of fork in the road. But there's definitely a massive appetite for it. But I just think that, I think if you were French or Italian looking at us from outside, you might say, you know, they're just basically having a bit of a reset at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think you know, places in Europe such as, you know, France or Italy have well advertised themselves in terms of food origin and regional food, because you'll go to Bologna for tortellini, or Barolo wine to go to Torino. So you have all these places where they really define themselves. And when you think of the UK, you're right, I think we're still a bit behind, but I think the Southwest and the Southeast have really defined that they are defining themselves. A lot of people from Europe go to Cornwall because I'm like, oh, I've heard the seafood is really good, or I've heard the cheese is really good. But, you know, coming from Leicester, we're famous for Melton Mowbray pork pies and for, you know,
delicious.
Cheddar. Oh yeah, I always go, whenever I go back, I do stuff my face. So, but, you know, a lot of people don't know that.
I mean, I think you're right, and I think that's because places, like you'd see we have lots of cookery schools in northern Italy, in the Basque Country. You have lots of people there, food tourism, you know, people going and having a whole, you know, farm to fork kind of experience with wine and all that sort of stuff. So this is stuff that's coming in now, which is, we're starting to see it in Cornwall, because like you say, we've got the name, and because I think most of the Europeans can understand in some way that because we sort of stick out into the Atlantic a bit like Galicia does, and they know that great fish comes from the Atlantic, great seafood comes from the Atlantic. So I can see like it's starting to definitely have like appeal to, but obviously we're having political differences with the EU at the moment, which is probably really going to put that back a load of years, which is a real shame, because I think it's a, you know, to have a love, you know, I've got this image of a, you know, food tour in Cornwall, you know, and this old Cornish boy, you know, because when I went and did the stage down in Michel Brass, I remember I got picked up by his gardener, who was this, you know, really broad French spoken kind of farmer, you know, didn't speak a lot of English at all, and my French is all right, but I got by. But I remember being in the car with him, and it was such an experience that, like, you know, and I'm thinking, if somebody come to Cornwall and I could like have one of my friends' farmers, or maybe the dad or something, who's got these amazing stories, this great accent, really good looking, kind of, you know, salt of the earth kind of fella, and just him in the bus with you and saying, this used to be so and so's land, and this is, you know, go for a pub lunch and then go to the vineyards, get drunk, and, you know, and the next day cook a load of food at the cookery school. It would work. You kind of got to see it as somebody else would see it. But you're right. The southeast, you know, Cornwall, they're reinventing themselves, and I guess places like Leicester have got the classics. But I guess a lot of the classic British dishes are kind of what people would say is a bit, I don't know, a bit kind of stodgy and all this sort of stuff. And I did a TV show where I took 10 dishes, 10 British dishes, and I got a food historian, Polly Russell from the British Library, and we did the history of the dish, and then we'd take the dish somewhere. So we'd take like we took steak and kidney pudding to Singapore, we took like potted shrimp to Darwin, we went to Bangkok with pork buns and apple sauce. And we took all these dishes there, and we basically had this kitchen. We just gave all the food away for free on the street, like, but just asking what people thought of it with a local chef. And we kind of twist the dish at the end just to sort of give it a bit of a local flavour. But during that food history, there's a lot of food history in the country. A lot. I mean, Heston Blumenthal's really big on it, and amazing dishes you can have at places like dinner. Just unbelievable food. Like, takes inspiration from history. But I think most people would say the sort of historical British food is a bit kind of, you know, I guess stodgy, but I
would call it comforting.
Yeah, comforting is a good word. Yeah, that's a very diplomatic way of saying it. But you know, but by the same token, you look at, say, pies, for example, as you're talking about the, you know, the fantastic pork pies from Mount Mowbray, and then you look at Callum Franklin at the Pie Room in Holborn. You see what he's doing, and these amazing like fish pies with this amazing artwork on them, and they're beautiful, and you think, you know, you can reinvent all this sort of stuff. And I guess Cornwall, you know, we've got pasties, we've got stargazy pies, we've got, you know, a load of stuff down here. It's just about trying to repackage it and make it like exciting for people to come and visit.
But I think, you know, like, I grew up on Lancashire food. My mum was from Lancashire, so, you know, granted, I had the Yorkshire puddings with my hot pot, but you know, if you go to the North Coast, for example, in Spain, a lot of people, because of the climate, it's very similar to Scotland, well, the north of the UK. A lot of people are brought up on stews and beans and, you know, hearty food. So it'd be really interesting for the UK somehow to like specify the origin of these sort of foods in the UK and target it to northern Spaniards, because they would love it. I think, you know, we have good stews.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the one thing that the northern Spanish and the Basque especially people have done really, really well is to look at. So if you look at the Basque, the new cuisine of Basque, I can't remember the word in French, but in Spanish, sorry, but they took all of their traditional, you know, grandmothers, grandfathers' dishes, and they basically have just turned them into something that's like culinary and special, and they've put them on a pedestal in these Michelin restaurants. And I think it's you know, that's the kind of thing I think that the UK is starting to do. You're seeing it at places like Longclume, and you're seeing it at these other, you know, really like these places up in the north, like Sat Baines is doing a great job of looking at these traditional kind of, you know, Midlands and Northern dishes, because at the end of the day, there's dishes all over, like you say, Scotland, the cuisine of Scotland, the game, all that kind of stuff is so interesting. And when you see what's been done in Scandinavia, it's, you know, we've got a far better climate than they do over there, and they're able to make, you know, some of the best restaurants in the world. So yeah, I think it's a challenge for chefs, but I think it's one that they'll enjoy over the next sort of decade or two. Just like really kind of, and I'm really fascinated by archaeological food, because I did a master's degree in archaeology, so I'm really fascinated about trying to find ways of, you know, how, you know, we look at preservation methods, salting and brining, and, you know, pickling, and then like clamping vegetables and burying stuff over winter. And, you know, recently with the local farm, we've been clamping, you know, putting stuff, basically stopping it growing, putting it in sand, burying it over the winter, and then digging it up in spring, because in February, March is a time where you've got nothing, and nothing's in the ground, nothing's growing, and all you can do is overwinter stuff. So, but then we've been finding ourselves having like these amazing beetroots in asparagus season, and people going, oh, what are you doing serving beetroots? I'm like, well, actually, these are from last year that we've like this old technique of clamping them, putting them under the ground. But then you're able to eat something between March, February, and April when the asparagus comes out, or all the peas come out, and all the rest of it. So there's a lot to go at, a lot fascinating time in food, to be honest, to be a chef and to be down here in the Southwest.
No, definitely. So, although lockdown might have changed our habits, our love of food experience and desire to explore the world has not changed. What dishes do you think encapsulate the love of eating and, getting messy and getting your fingers all like grubby with food?
Well, there's any good one, any good one. I think from things like frites, like the French frites, which like shellfish on ice, often served raw or very lightly cooked, oysters and all that kind of stuff. I think that's my first kind of get your hands in, and we do them at the restaurant, and they're like they're sort of this sort of like a meter wide circle of just the best shellfish for me in the world, which comes from the North Atlantic. And that experience of just watching kids have their first one at the restaurant, and they are in there, and there's like things that are like snails, like whelks, and you've got like razor clams and mussels and scallops and all that kind of stuff. I just think it's there's something to be said to if people talk about Instagram and food all the time, and sometimes you go it's style over substance. But if I see a picture of somebody with a massive Frida Mare and a glass of white wine, I'm like, you're doing it well, definitely doing that well. You're having a good day, to be sat there just absolutely, it's so fresh. It's like, and you do get a lot of restaurants that will tart it all up. They might chop up the crab and dress it, and they might do some little, but I just like it with just mayonnaise and white wine and shallot vinegar and just a big glass of wine and just go for it. So that's kind of my ultimate, like, as as a person that's eaten that kind of food for a long time. But then also things like Singapore chili crab or white pepper crab, or these any crab dish where you just basically got a bib on is it's always a good look. So yeah, and then I just think seafood's just, there's something about it, and I know it's going to be related to the fact that seafood and shellfish was one of the most available foods to like pre-agricultural humans, but it was, so there's something I think that connects you to food quite well when you're like, going at it with your hands and cracking things with rocks and this, that, and the other. So we did a big clam bake for the BBC. So we buried a load of seafood under sand and tarpaulin and hot rocks and cooked it all. And did it with we did it like kind of American style with a load of Frank's hot sauce and this, that, and the other. But it was something, we were on a beach, like 500 of us just eating it, and a bit of sand here and there, but a lot of beer, and it was good. So anything like that, I think.
Oh God, I'm so hungry. Like I'm a sucker for seafood and pie. So if it's seafood up there, it's one of the two things I'm such bad weaknesses for. So we talk about sustainability. You've partnered with some of the region's best suppliers. How important is it for you to shop and support locally?
Yeah, well, I think it's massively important, especially we use a wild product, and I think it's really important that you preserve as much as you can, only use what you need to, and that you understand it, because you need to educate your clients and your staff about it. So obviously we have 32 day boats that fish for us, and now day boats are your boats that just go out for one day, they come back, they don't stay at sea for weeks on end. But there's also a place for longer, like trawlers that are trawling over certain grounds. If you're trawling over a sandy ground for things like plaice and turbot, the damage you're doing to the seafloor is minimal. It's just when you're trawling around reefs and these inland areas, you've got to be really careful. And I think it's a minefield, because you've just got to constantly keep updating your own knowledge. You can't be expected to know everything that's happening out at sea. It's just not possible. So you have to trust your suppliers, and your suppliers are the people that are dealing with the fishermen and everything on a daily basis. But also there's something to be said for sustainability of human business as well, in terms of fishing. The fishing fleet in the southwest was being basically wound up. It was going to basically non-exist anymore. And over the past sort of decade, 15 years, it's really kind of come back to not as big an extent as it was in the 60s, but by all these restaurants using the product, and you'll be able to sell a lot more in the domestic market, you are supporting a human population as well as a fish population, then you've always got to be mindful of making sure that there's a balance. You know, you don't want to just suddenly, if we went to if we just listened to certain types of science on fish, you know, you'd basically go, well, we're just never going to use it because it changes every year, that everything's changing and it's so confusing for our customers. Why don't we just stop using it? But then you're putting a fishing fleet out of business, and there's people in that supply chain who are reliant on that money coming in. So I think you have to just be, it's really tough, and it's spent probably most of my time these days is dealing with these issues as the sustainability and how you can sustain, the not just the tourist industry, but also the supply chain that we use for our ingredients. So yeah, it's huge, but I think it's very easy to it's in the same way it's very easy to say a plastic straw is basically, if you stop using plastic straws, you'll stop at all kind of marine pollutants. It's not going to happen like that, but you have to start somewhere, and you have to have a balanced view, and you have to listen to the fishermen. The fishermen are out there catching the fish, but also listen to the science. But obviously since Brexit, it's been quite difficult because the science was mainly in Europe, and we're not seeing the same level of interaction with government bodies as we did before Brexit. It's just the truth. They just don't seem to be either as interested, or they don't have the money to do it. But before, we had a really good idea of the stocks and everything like that. And since Brexit and COVID obviously has a factor, but it's been a bit of a kind of sort of just figure it out for yourself. So it's been quite difficult.
Yeah, I'm hoping it changes because, I was talking to a lawyer that's a professor at De Montfort University, and he works in food policy, and he's like the middle guy between slow food and in the UK. And I think a lot of policy agreements weren't set, or there's loads of grey areas. I'm hoping once time continues, there should be established, which is, in terms of funding or just information that's readily available in Europe will pass back on to the UK, which I'm hoping.
I mean, I think, I don't want to get into politics too much, but I do think it's going to be a question of, you have to sort of go and find it, you have to almost be, which is a shame because before it was given to us as a kind of part of a partnership with Europe. But now I'm just sensing that as much as important as it might seem to certain ministers and certain parts of the government, I think every time you think that, something bigger comes along, whether it's COVID, the war in Ukraine, or whatever. But I'm not saying that they won't get around to it. I hope they do, because I really, we need to hope. But I just didn't see it when we had the opportunities just after the Brexit vote. With the years before COVID, I didn't see, there wasn't people coming up and saying, knocking down our door and saying, like, can we help you with sustainability policy or anything like that? And I think it's probably moved a few rungs down the priorities list as a result of bigger issues in the world.
But I'm remaining positive. I'm hoping at some point it will connect back.
Yeah, me too.
So I want to talk about your Rock Oyster Festival. It attracts thousands of people each year. So what motivates you to hosting it? And it's a great product. So we've got amazing oyster beds down here in Cornwall. It's also, it's a good time of the year to eat them. And it's, it's sort of built around, the festival site is built around the sort of dairy land that used to be, excuse me, so the farms nearby were dairy cow fields, and then the oyster farming became their kind of, they diversified into oyster farming. So a really interesting story. So it's got a good sort of like base for like talking about food, because it's like a great story of, dairy farming was really in a bit of a pickle with, bovine TB and all this kind of stuff. And they then diversified to farming something else, which is farming something in the water right in front of them in this beautiful kind of area where all this, you have samphire beds, and you pick all these amazing marsh herbs, and you've got like salt lamb down there. So it's a very foodie kind of a like location for it. Plus the fact that, it's basically, this is the closest product to our restaurant. It's in the summer, they basically put them on barges, and they're 5 minutes across the river. And when you're eating in the restaurant, if you sat on the conservatory or up in the bar, you can see the oyster beds right there at low tide. So it really connects to the business as well. And
but then also it's, you know, we've over the years the area has attracted like quite a few young people in the sort of summer, you know, for you know the Prince William and Harry used to holiday here when they were at school and university. It's always been kind of a you know, a bit like the Hamptons. It's got that kind of, you know, sort of summer vibe feel about it, and really just doing a music festival with some food just seemed like a really good idea. And that this is, you know, they've been doing it for about a decade on and off, but it's just they've revamped it, and really the food is a real big leader of it alongside the music. And I think that's just a shift in festivals and across the country. If you look at Alex James's big festival and Latitude and all these other things, there's big chef demo tents, there's big chef food areas, there's big like pop-up, you know, street food markets, all this kind of stuff. So it's just like, you know, it's kind of tuning into that, but then using the fact that we're in Cornwall, it's the summer and people love to come down. So, you know, those chefs come down and stay for a week and visit their suppliers and look at all the new things that are happening down in Cornwall. So it's kind of, and it's just a nice vibe. You know, it's not like Glastonbury or anything. It's just like, it's pretty chill. You can do a bit of stand-up yoga, paddling, boarding, or whatever you want to do, a bit of wellness, a bit of some spa work, and then you can have some nice food and drinks and watch nice music.
Awesome. So, you know, like you're offering, as one of a part of the activities for the festival, you're offering foraging at the seaside and the surrounding foliage. Are you finding that the younger generation are more interested in this because it's a younger generation that are trying to, you know, are more conscious about sustainability and, you know, understanding the old ways of doing things in terms of food?
I mean, foraging's been around obviously forever, but in a restaurant. So we've been using samphire and wild garlic in our restaurants for nearly 50 years because they're there, and it's like, you know, wild garlic is so easy to spot. You can smell garlic, and it's so, you know, and same with samphire, which is down at the Rock Oyster site. And these things they're just products in our calendar. So, you know, whenever, you know, in spring we'll have them on, and in summer we'll have samphire on. So I think kids, well, not you kids, but the younger generation is definitely interested in exploring it. But also I think the older generations are as well, because I think it kind of connects them to something that they probably did see when they were younger, but didn't like ever, you know, samphire would probably have been on people's plates, but they may have just, you know, it may jog a memory. So I think it's kind of across all age groups. But again, you know, with regards to sustainability of foraging, it's always a bit of a grey area, because I think if everyone started to forage in the same areas, you'd find there'd be like the blackberry picking wars and all this kind of stuff. So you have to kind of know how to kind of propose it. But I think what it shows is people are really interested in food, want to find something that's different. And I think that just shows the sort of depth of kind of knowledge and wanting to find out more about food.
No, definitely. I think one of the things I actually enjoy reading about your festival is that you're offering everything. It's like a whole 100% immersion into the Southwest. It's like you can do this and you can do that, which makes you slightly different in comparison to other food festivals that are just, you know, the music and the food. But I think it's really good that you're giving them a sense of Cornwall, a life in Cornwall.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's really, probably I should tell the team that, because that's a really good thing. We might start putting that in the marketing.
Well, I want to get a free ticket, and now
there we go. Yeah.
But I think as well, like the festival, in a sense, is a good way. You know, you're becoming an advocate for Cornwall. You know, you're promoting everything it has to offer. And I think as well that also makes people want to go, because, you know, there's so many things, you know, people go to Cornwall for the holidays, but you're giving them something that they wouldn't necessarily do if you weren't doing a festival.
Yeah, and also it's an opportunity to sort of see it all in one weekend, and then maybe next year you might go, oh, like I remember seeing, I met that really cool oyster farmer from Falmouth, so I might go down to Falmouth, and then, you know, when I was talking to him, he told me about this cool bar that's like an independent bar in Falmouth, like the Chintz Symposium, whatever. And then you spend a couple of weekends in Falmouth. And it's sort of like, the thing with food tourism is one of the reasons. I mean, we were in Albania once filming with Rick, and Albania had obviously come out of communism, and they would, but because they had started a bit late, they were able to look at what kind of tourism they wanted, and the government were really keen on food tourism. And the reason they were really keen on food tourism is because food tourism in comparison to say dance music tourism. Dance music money comes in, and the money just goes, it filters out, and it goes into people's private boats and jets, and it gets drunk and get pissed up against the wall, or whatever you want to say. But food tourism is very egalitarian. You'll stay in a hotel, you'll go and see a farmer, you go to farmer's market, you'll buy some products, you'll take some stuff home. It kind of, the money spreads around the economy a lot better. So I think with the Rock Oyster Festival and with these kinds of things, it's a way of sort of showcasing it all, a bit like I suppose if you want, like, it'd be like a fair, like an expo of Cornish great produce, and then you can then go off and explore it later at your own leisure.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm moving on to my last question. Are there any tasty surprises to look forward to, and what's next for you?
Tasty surprises to look forward to? What, in Rock Oyster or in general?
In general, maybe
in general,
at the restaurants.
I think yeah, I mean, this summer we're doing a summer of shellfish at the again. It's again, it's the first summer we're back to everything's open as normal, everything's normal, back to and one of the things we used to do a lot is our summer of shellfish. So in all restaurants, we just, because in the summer it's when there's lots and the boats can go out fishing, all the local boats are out and they're operating, so we want to give them as much money as we can. So it's really about celebrating fish and shellfish, but mainly shellfish this summer in all restaurants. So every restaurant's going to have like a lobster on, or a crab dish, or something that just shouts shellfish, and this whole idea of summer, and just cracking it open, and like we were talking about freedom airs earlier on. So that's like the big thing for us this summer we're looking forward to. And then in terms of new stuff, I mean, obviously the biggest trend in my industry, which is fish and shellfish really, is around kind of fish, this idea of fish butchery. A guy called Josh Nyland from Sydney, who I work with at Fat Duck, who's amazing. He's been doing all this aging fish and making, hams and stuff and making things out of livers and all that. And I think there's definitely an element of, whether or not we'll ever go as far as Josh does, because he's a genius, but definitely like using some different bits of fish that have kind of bit underloved, the cheeks or the tongues, or the bones in the face, and like chicken wings, you could do fish wings, and you treat them in the same way you do, like I had this great fish wing with like a fish sauce caramel in London recently, and it was so delicious. And Asian kind of countries have been doing this for a long time, using every part of a fish. So it's something that we're going to be working on, I think, for the next couple of years, because food prices are going up, fish prices are going up. So if we could say to the fishermen, look, can you keep us, the cheeks or the, Josh makes ice cream out of eyeballs and stuff like that, which I think is probably a bit too far for us. But that's, I think, probably the biggest trend. And I mean, aging fish, we have always done a bit of fish aging, not like as long as meat, but definitely there is something in things like Dover sole you can age for sort of a week or so, and they just get a bit softer. So there's a lot there, I think, which is going to be quite exciting in fish. And people like Tom Brown at Cornerstone, Nathan Outlaw, these kind of people will probably be pushing that envelope quite hard. We'll probably be more middle of the road and just be like, nice little gratin of skate cheeks or whatever. But there's definitely stuff to look at in fish and shellfish for sure.
I'm looking forward to that. But so, Jack, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. Bye.